Good afternoon, Abbotsford residents. I'm Mr. Pelican, running for your Commander-in-Chief of Abbotsford. And the first thing we're going to do as a community is get rid of the Abbotsford APD. They're out of here. They got a lot of political ties, a lot of begging for the community and what they can do. These men failed this community. They failed families, but above all, they failed the justice system and the law. They were buddies and friends and pals of Henry Braun and the upper establishment and beat this community unbelievable. Men and women that believed that that uniform would always buy them out of the trouble they were in. You can't block in elections. You can't use the task force. And above all, the racist act by Councillor Mogel so Henry could win with the Abbotsford upper white-collar crime in the police department on their South Asians has to be called out by all law enforcement, by all political people, politicians, and above all, by Abbotsford residents. Henry Braun went into the city to steal hundreds of millions of dollars and lift hundreds of millions of dollars in job sites. He had an elite ring of people till his son, Darren Brown, the economic development officer, told how he's using the Abbotsford police, the Abbotsford newspaper, the MP Ed Fast and Mike DeYoung, and brought it down to the ground. But the Abbotsford police, the Abbotsford men and women that used the uniform and cried at gangs and the homeless, and one of us died in the line of duty, started attacking its residents and threatening its residents. Along with the Mission RCMP, politicians like Bill Van Der Zem and his people that came in to help, we stood up on social media worldwide to show that this ain't a conspiracy, that these assholes in the top of the Abbotsford police were using them uniforms for sympathy and threatening residents, smashing phones, smashing cameras, telling people to drop videos, and then targeting you. And then cried at the uniform, and now let's see what we're going to do. We're going to phone the great RCMP and ask the RCMP, Abbotsford police need to lean on you. We need sympathy. We're all supposed to work together in that. It can't. George Ferguson made it that the city auditorium would hold the Abbotsford police accountable, and that's where you spoke. When Henry Brown's son showed that Henry was blocking everything from the auditorium and using Vicky Hopes to keep it out because it was a one-lunged newspaper in Abbotsford, unless you went upstairs. He was in the driver's seat lifting jobs. I made it clear on a podcast. People that run fentanyl rings and organized crime rings do it for money. Ram Funka Diverse ran Ross Siemens' signs on his development with the Abbotsford First councillors that were Ross's slate when Henry was mayor in order for favors to help him change the zoning from 200 to 400, help him get away with all the criminal bylaws and acts that should have been imposed on him, and everything else. But above all, the abuse on the homeless, taking Abbotsford's taxpayers, hauling rocks down on Gladys Avenue on the buffer zone. Today, you asked me to do a follow-up. I want you to look in between them trees. I'll stand out at a distance here, and you can see the rocks. But just below the rocks, you can see all the tents, the homeless. Between that back of that rock pile and where the tents are in there is a 40-foot, 20-foot buffer zone between two train tracks. The Abbotsford police, the city manager Peter Sparanese, Ross Siemens, and city engineer figured that they owed Ram Funka Diverse this favor for Henry Braun. Knowing that Ed Fast's son-in-law, Devon Roy, was tied in to Pacific Peak Homes, which Ed owned and that's tied to Diverse. To chase the homeless off the buffer zone in front of the Salvation Army, which is a 30-foot piece of property I showed you on a video, and cut the tree down in a city official uniform at 12 o'clock at night. No one would ever believe it was vandalism. We will use Vicky Hopes to block it, and we will get what we need for Ram Funka Diverse. This is how these threats begin. This is why Henry snuck in to Cooper's Farm and changed the zoning with his wife, his son showed. took it off the dockets and put it on the dockets. It was to fill your pockets in money and reap the richnesses off of Abbotsford taxpayers. I made it clear, as your commander-in-chief, the first thing we got to do is get a police department. That's first. We got to toss the Abbotsford police investigators. We got to toss them, not toss them like toss them what you think. We got to go through their records, go through their houses, go through their assets, go through their phone records, and see their loyalty was too much to this upper establishment of Abbotsford. And we knew this. We saw this when they tried, all of them tried to get behind Mike Dion and tried to get him in as MP. The illegal stuff that Mike was doing, running his signs in Mill Lake, and Eric Nivel, his financial agent, which was a CPA, and then running it in Little Oak Mall and having all them endorsements and everything. Abbotsford residents worked very hard, including me, to make sure that the new MP was Suk Mangill in order to bust up the criminal ring that took advantage. Abbotsford residents, as a city, we're way behind Chilliwack's development. Why? Why are we behind? Because Henry Brown was cornering the market and development for himself and his friends. That also tied up the city, Darren Brown showed me, from people who wanted to come in and say, I want to knock down my house. I own a big lot and I want to build 2 units here. Henry was having Rob Isaac, city engineers and planning, to work on his stuff and his stuff that he could steal from the community plan, Cooper's Farm. We saw what took place up there with Polygon. We saw what took place with the Millionaire and everything, and all the stuff that he could rush. And you could see I loaded it and I showed you it, Dave Lowens. But here's what I'm at. The Abbotsford police were used and manipulated, the simple minds of these men. I mean, they're just simple in the head. Just totally simple. There's nothing in that in there. That's why we got to get rid of them. We're manipulated to use taxpayers' dollars to throw the homeless out from in front of the Salvation Army, scatter them all through town, what created a problem now, scattered them in Mill Lake, that Brad Viss is crying they're in Mill Lake, and took them from here, where they sat for years down here and been fed. This was where Henry manipulated the newspaper and Dickie Hopes on the chicken manure against Bruce Banman. It was scandal. But when it was going to benefit Henry and his partners, and Ross Siemens owed Ron Funk back, like Darren Brown said, he owes him back. He ran him in the election, him and Dave Sadub. Dave had his people from Diverse in his Capriccia newspaper working the phones and blocking you, Mr. Pelican. Pulled all these rocks on your taxpayers' dollars, with no oversight of Abbotsford councillors calling them out because they were a collaborating team. That's when Darren showed me they went to Henry's house. So I had to work with the Mission RCMP and Bill and all these people and premiers and everybody to show that the Abbotsford councillors were cohorting together and that they weren't going to put a stop to this vicious act. Now the homeless get endangered. Like I said, they can't get properly fed because they're in that gully. In this hot spell we got, they're very dehydrated. The churches are telling me that look after them. Some of them are going in there after they buy their drugs and staggering between the 2 train tracks and put in danger. But to the Abbotsford police chief and to his investigators and his HR department, that's quite all right. That's where we need them, so that would help Ron Funk, that gives to the police foundation, to Erwin Brown, Henry's brother, that's funded. That's what we need. That's what we need. These are the men and women that went and cried and used manipulation, that they were there and they were going to cause the train a problem. And they were going to cause all this. Now they change them in the buffer zone between the 2 big train tracks and set up these big tents that now if there's a fire, she's going to burn clean. But if a train comes by and they're hauling stuff, and now between that train track, they're like little beavers. They're hauling lumber, they're hauling stuff for their shelters, and they're running out of energy and oxygen, some of them little skinny guys. So they're leaving these big pipes they need to prop up their tents and their 2x4s right on the train track. Then they're going in the tents to sleep, and when they're sleeping, because they're tired now, hauling this stuff, a train's gonna come. What do you think a train's gonna do when it hits these big pipes? Either derail rip the fences, cause a major accident, and maybe majorly with dragging that pipe along the road, knocking all these tents and cadaver, cutting these homeless' heads off and their legs and arms and everything and mangling them. But this was all right because Ron Funk of Diverse needed to change the zoning and go for illegal job sites. There is no difference. There is no difference. Now, I stand here on the world stage to tell you, when people set up meth labs, they set up meth labs to profit out the back so they can get ahead in life. This is why the law was created. This is why when George Ferguson made the private police the way it was, it had to stay in front of the city because somebody could own it. Buddies of pals and pals. I'm an investigator. I'm an investigator, and you can look at this. This will tell you that the incompetence of Watts and his investigators were buddies. There was no investigating here. They were buddies. How much did Rob Funk pay them to do what they were doing to the homeless and remove it for that job site to get that pipeline down? This put them in high risk. It also put the people that gotta go feed them in high risk. Sometimes these trains that come right through here, you can't even hear them. You can't even hear them because the traffic and everything, and they just roll right through here. But now, to the Abbotsford police, to the Abbotsford spokesman, and to Ross Siemens, that's quite all right because we got them out of the way when we set up the illegal boneyard that I showed you. And I showed you that the contractor that's supposed to start the digging ain't putting his company there because he don't want to be sued or tagged with it, so he hasn't moved in his site trailer and said, look at PCL, Boza Construction, or anybody wants to put their name there because they've been sneaking in at night. This is what Henry Brown was doing to steal the job sites. The same as fentanyl. He wasn't creating, there was a shortage of housing. He was running and illegally using the friends of the city, Rob Isaac, city engineer and manager, and then needed to load Ross. When I went to the Premier Bill Vanderzam and people that did that, I said he's got no choice. He's in over his head. He's using the Abbotsford police, and they need these lands, and they promised the developers. Henry had to go all in. First of all, getting in his car, trying to end my life and mangle me, then paying his top police chief to cover it, Mike Sir. You saw Mike Sir fled. Then you saw his officers ring my house in the task force, thanks to the RCMP, all of them in the black car. If I'm undercover and I'm in the black car, I'm such a valuable asset to the Abbotsford police. Nobody will come at me because I'm a sneak in the Abbotsford police. My face is supposed to be disguised from everybody. There's sympathy with all law enforcement when you attack us. These were attacks on residents. These are attacks on the weak and the vulnerable and everything. And I don't think there's an officer that watches my podcast anywhere that knows that this was based on greed and it was an elite ring and establishment that Henry Braun was the engine and put together. That's why he put his son in front of him. We have to show our community that guys like Mike Sir, guys like Colin Watts and his top investigators have to be punished to the full of the law. That's what holds you, and that's what makes you accountable. And that's what we need to do. Today, ladies and gentlemen, you asked me to do this follow-up podcast of what happened to the homeless, and this is where they were. And last night at Garden Park Towers, Superman Gill's office was announced and it was open. And Kelly Shahal was sneaking in there. Oh, Kelly was in there. It looks like Kelly Shahal, instead of here doing a podcast as a probation officer and an officer of the court, saying her city endangered them with Dave Lowens and Ross Siemens and Dave Sadu. No, she went in there and tried to see if I'm welcome in there after what I did when I didn't endorse Souk Mangel and I stood by and let it happen when I walked in the building. Oh, she darted out the back door where the trucks were bringing food and she fled. She looked like a deer in the headlights, frozen. She couldn't move. But last night, Andrew Scheer was there to stand beside his new MP. And Ed wasn't there. None of these people, these leaders of Abbotsford were there. And Vicky Hopes wasn't there. None of these people. Because it was an attack on Souk Mangel. An attack, if it wasn't Souk Mangel, if it was Steve Schaefer that was in the leadership, they would have attacked him too. Because the attack was Not about the character, but about the person, so we could load Mike DeYoung, and that's what that attack was. But ladies and gentlemen, as your commander-in-chief, I'm going to lower your taxes, and I showed you. We're going to go after the illegal job sites, but we're going to get the RCMP into Abbotsford first of all. We're going to create stage 1 and stage 2 housing for the homeless. We're going to go after Archway and take that money he raised and create the stage 1 and stage 2. We're going to take the homeless out of high risks. We're going to give them back where they need to go, into their little parks, and create designated areas. That way they got something when the city needs to force and say you can't be here. Then they always can go to the court and say, no, they got a designated area. We have to look after the vulnerable and the weak. That is why you stand up to run these positions. But we're going to go after the organized criminal ring and get your taxpayers' dollars back. We're going to go after the 12.4 million Ross was stealing. We're going to go after the Abbotsford Police new building on the 71 million that Henry embezzled for his friends to get that. And we're going to see who signed the cost overruns on the Abbotsford Police, which people, which city councils, and didn't hold the developer responsible and figured, well, we'll give them cost overruns and then we'll get it through the back door. When you sign a contract to build a building, you got to stay locked to that contract. And then people that sign that cost overruns, because Unitech was in problems, we'll go after that. If Ross signed that, we'll go after Ross Siemens and we'll go after his assets that he's tied to his dad because he owns gas stations, and we'll get them dollars back for you. We'll get them back because we won't be burden the Abbotsford taxpayers. We're going to bring a really good team in. Then we're going to help Farmer Road, all them people that got deadly sick, and we're going to look at pressing criminal charges on Abbotsford's bylaw, top official, Magna. Them people got deadly sick. They went after the other bog here the other day. You saw in the newspaper, they went after the other bog because they're not in that guy's back pockets. But the one on Mackenzie Road, illegally, on farms, never was given a cease and desist order, nothing. This is the wisdom and the knowledge of great man that trained me. I made it clear. I started out in the Wall Center for Peter Wall, moved on to other developers, and I made it clear. Mike Dakota Avani, when I built the North Shore Pier with him, taught me so much. And these are the things you need to do. And fine. As your politician, the first thing we're going to do is remove the Abbotsford Police. To the men and women in Abbotsford Police, investigators, leading investigators. It's so obvious, the criminal acts that you did to all other law enforcement. I want to make sure that there's no avenue that you can leave Abbotsford and go on to another police force. We've got to make sure that you're stopped dead in your tracks and called out for it. And we've got to make sure that your faces are flashed everywhere because you never deserve to hold another public office. The attempted murder by Henry, the threats on my life, ringing my house, pulling me uptown and everything else. The uniform is not going to protect you. Watts, uniform's not going to protect your officers. And I believe the general public now knows that the manipulation of, we're going to have an investigation by the Police Complaints Commission is long past and expired. And we're going to see what's going wrong. And let me tell you what we're going to do with the Police Complaints Commission and investigators. We're going to sit down and say, now we got to be very careful how we handle this. This has got the top MP, Ed Fast, tied to Pacific Peak Homes with his son-in-law, Devin Roy. It's got Mike DeYoung, and it's got a leading politician. So we need to have investigators that'll listen to us to clean it. That's not the way she's done. I've never seen law enforcement done. Henry's attempted murder would have lined investigators up for criminal reports at my house. And every witness would have been witnessed so he could have been charged. The Sports Center with Abbotsford First and Kelly Shahal, who's on Abbotsford First, said when I grabbed Sandy Blue up to Whipper-Wapper, Barty Sindhu, councillor members that were running for councils and other dignitaries called it out and said, they're lying. They want a sex allegation scandal against Mr. Bellingham to make him back out so they could load Ross Siemens. Why would you load Ross Siemens? Why would you do it? And you could see him babying Ross Siemens, and you could see what Vicky Holmes was doing. There was no mistake when Darren Braun showed. Darren Braun showed his heart and turned against his dad for his residents to tell what was being done. The Abbotsford Police are being ran under Adolf Hitler, Henry Brown, as the SS, and we as residents must put a stop to it because it had my leading MP Ed Fast involved and Mike DeYoung. And the RCMP knew what Henry was doing with his son, the Abbotsford newspaper, and Abbotsford Council in his house. The mission men and Mission RCMP said, go to Ed. When Ed flip-flopped the RCMP knew that Henry Brown controlled them, because Henry Brown, Ed Fast should have called Henry on the hit and run, the election and everything. And now it's just surfacing, Pete Holmes, Devin Roy and everything. We're going to go after these job sites, just as we did fentanyl. And we're going to take them down, and we're going to seize them, and we're going to get the assets. I encourage you, because you know now with my podcast up, the Abbotsford police got to sneak in here and boot the homeless. So let me tell you how Darren Brown showed me how to do it. He said, Abbotsford police are wasting Abbotsford's tax dollars, and my dad's inflating them and stealing. Call the CP police. The CP police patrol the train tracks, and no one move them out of there like that and not cause Abbotsford taxpayers. So now we got to watch for that call, because I know some of the CP police officers. Colin Watts, his leading investigator, maybe Gertie Purdy that tried to cover Henry's hit and run and attempted murder on my life, maybe Siemens that said drop all these videos or I'll personally bury you for Henry, I'll plant evidence and have you falsified and charged. So we need to do that, and we need to make sure, but the first thing we need to do is get him out of harm's way, put him back up in front of the Salvation Army, get David Eby to understand that he's being played left, right, and center. And we need to get them rocks hauled out of there. And we need accountability, and we need to put them back to the people that looked after them so they can be fed by our churches and the homeless. We don't need to worry about Sage, Ron Funk and Diverse. I'm going to take it from you when I'm mayor. It's gone. He's going to lose his assets. He's going to lose his insider trading, because that's what it was. And Ross knew this. But we're going to also open it up, because if it happened here in Abbotsford, it's happening everywhere with Ron Funk and Diverse. So ladies and gentlemen, I encourage you to come down and put your naked eye on it and help Abbotsford community. Let's bring Abbotsford community up, that we're a community that we won't tolerate this kind of stuff, but above all, we're lobbying for the best. That's the RCMP, because these mayors and these people went in. It's a new level of criminal ring. It's a new level, a new wave of criminal ring. We'll suit up in uniform, we'll get in office, and then we're untouchable, and this is the new level of this high elite criminal ring. And I made it clear, this is bigger than fentanyl, it's bigger than every kind of crime there is, because it's attacking the vulnerable, attacking the weak, and it's also going after families. And we need to put a stop to it. We need to make sure guys like Mike Sura brought back, face the justice system, guys like Henry and Ed, and face the law so it doesn't happen. So that's how you learn and say, I'm not going to do that. I'm going to go be an informant to the RCMP, and I'm going to tell, and that's how you stay clear of it. So I'm live, Abbotsford, British Columbia. And to Kelly Shahal, I quit crawling around with the BC Conservatives and trying to crawl in Suk Mangel. It was so obvious. When I was in that room, everybody was laughing at you and said, did you see her? Did you see her? Oh, maybe she's looking, trying to butter up to see who's going to block her in the next run and everything. And I made it clear last night to Suk Mangel, Andrew Scheer, and everybody. This is where Kelly Shahal should be, not looking for free food at Suk Mangel's office open. I'm live, Abbotsford, British Columbia.